All right, so I figured I'd change things up a little bit here. I'm going to do a video on radios, since I think that's probably relevant to a lot of people in the prepping community and whatnot. I figured I'd talk a little bit about some of the radios that I've gotten, and some of the differences, and also some of the maybe potential licensing issues that may be present depending on which country and jurisdiction you live in. So right off the bat, I'm in Canada, and in Canada things are similar to the United States as far as radio licensing and whatnot is concerned, but I think up here we're a little bit more strict and stuff. So I'm what they call an advanced ham radio operator. There's two different levels of licensing for ham radio operators here. There's your basic license, and then there's your advanced license. There's different qualifications within those two licensing levels. So your basic, there's a basic, just a basic, and then there's what they call a basic. There goes my dog knocking everything over here. So anyways, he's a nut, big 90-pound meathead here. So I don't know what you did there, you big knucklehead, but you're a wrecking machine. So back to the video and my messy work office downstairs. So where was I? Yeah, so the way to go, Doyle. You are a wrecking machine. So I won't edit that out. I won't restart it because I don't know, maybe you guys will find it funny. But back to the licensing. So yeah, so basic radio licensing in Canada follows as, there's simplify it. So basic, and then basic with honors. So to get honors, you've got to pass your basic license with, I think, an 80% proficiency level. And then with that, you are able to transmit in the ham bands. Sorry, the dog's kind of throwing me for a complete loop here. He's really knocked everything out of... I have no idea how he even did that. I really have no idea. He's pulled a drawer out of a wood stand that I've got my drill press set up on. How did you do that? Well, we'll go back to the video here because he's throwing me right off my game, and he's just sitting there chilling out like nothing ever happened. A big knucklehead. So anyways, licensing, keep it simple, basic with honors, and then you've got your advanced, which allows you to build radios and also run repeater stations here in Canada. So what we're going to focus on here today is commercial radios versus amateur radios. So for portables, I've got this one here, which is an ICOM commercial radio, and they transmit and receive between 174 and 136 megahertz. And then these two here, which are Chinese radios, and they are technically commercial in the sense that they operate and transmit in the full 2-meter band range, as well as the commercial range, which is 136 to 174, and the ham band being 144 to 148. So typically a ham radio is locked out of the frequency range as far as transmitting outside of 144 to 148. So this radio here, being an ICOM IC2300H, is a ham version, so an amateur radio, right? Not a commercial radio. So going back to these two, because you see these Baofangs everywhere. They're all over TV. They're all over the internet. They're cheap, like borscht, like they're, a dime a dozen. And, for $100, you can get sometimes two of these things, battery packs, programming cable, software that they come with, even though it's pretty crude software, versus, commercial radio, which is going to run you, $300 to $400. And then, these ones here are the Wuxun or Wuxun or whatever the hell they're called. I don't know, but they are a little more expensive of a radio, but they're Chinese also, and they are you know, there's some real differences. So I'm going to turn these off because I've got repeater stations going on in the background and EHS going on in the background and all sorts of stuff. So to stay on focus here and not get distracted. So I'm going to keep this one over here, and I'm going to look at these two radios right now, because a lot of you may be looking at these Vhf UV5Rs or these Wuxun or whatever the UVD1P or whatever the hell the new version of them is, and wondering, well, why, if I'm going to buy, you know, an offshore brand radio, why would I spend extra money on this one versus this one? And there are some real differences between these two radios in use. So that's what I'm going to focus on right now. And the main thing between the two of them is not so much in what, your transmitting ability. They both have similar performance, provided you've got a good antenna on them. But the main difference is the receive side. So the front end of the radio on this particular one is way better than that one. And what that means for you as the radio user is that this radio will have much better selectability as far as what it can hear, right? So it's not going to be as susceptible to interference, you know, from just computers and electronics and so on and so forth. Whereas this one, you can be in your house and, you know, go near your microwave or your fridge or something, right, in the house that produces an electrical field, and it's going to be much more susceptible to interference, right? So that'll apply anywhere out in the real world, right, where you have, you know, power lines and all sorts of different things that will, have an impact on radio interference. So both of these radios are direct programmable, meaning that you can actually program in which frequency, your tone squelch, and your PLL codes and all stuff that's related to repeaters and different things like that. So that is a bit of a issue here in Canada, and I'm sure it is in the States. Having a radio that you can actually program yourself is not technically legal unless you're properly licensed. So that becomes a bit of a gray area, because these things are all over the place. I look at actual commercial users using these radios all the time. For instance, like where I live, the ferries, right, which is a government-run corporation. They actually have their guys that direct traffic, in the ferry lineups and stuff, using these radios. That is technically illegal. So that's one consideration, right, depending on where you're at and what chance of actually running into issues using one of these radios would cause for you, right? So here we don't have a whole lot of policing and stuff going on with Industry Canada, but the risk is that somebody could take this radio, they could potentially program in a frequency for a public safety organization, such as ambulance or fire or police, and potentially interfere with communications, right? So that's why you don't want a radio that can be programmed in the field directly by the user to be in the wrong hands, right? Not to mention somebody that doesn't know what they're doing may just inadvertently enter in a frequency that's not the intended one and cause issues. So that is actually the main difference between these radios and the commercial one. So this radio, being a commercial VHF radio, it is not programmable by the user. So this one here, if I remember right, is a ICOM ICF33 radio. When I bought this radio, this was just the plain Jane faceplate without the DTMF pad on it, so it just simply had these ones. So there was a G and a GT, I think, is the model variant, and this one I upgraded the faceplate, so everything was there inside the radio as far as being able to upgrade to that, so I can you know, for my use, if I was keying up a repeater and wanting to use like an auto patch and use any of the DTMF enabled options on some of the repeaters, I can do that with this radio. I can do that with these ones too. To be honest, I don't actually remember what I need to do in order to do that. I think I just key down on the push to talk button and then press the DTMF pad and then go from there. So pretty much the same as this. But this radio requires a radio tech to program it via software. So for the average person, that's not going to be something that you can do. And that'll apply to any any commercial radio. You're going to have the programming cable and the software in order to program them, and the appropriate license to do that legally. And with these, they just program in through the mic port and the speaker port. There's a combination cable that plugs into both of them. It's actually the same cable as these Chinese radios. The Kenwood commercials that I have, the mic port and the speaker port are actually opposite, right? Same size, so they plug in, but the way they're wired is different. So the programming cable that works for this radio, which is like a U478 programming cable, I believe actually works for these as well. But anyways, just trying to stay on topic here. Now, the other big thing with these radios here, these radios have antennas that are specific to certain bands, right? So whether you're primarily transmitting in the lower band range of the VHF band, so like say 136 to 143 or something like that, there will be a color code that relates to that. There's blue, green, and red, I think. So if you're transmitting, say, in the 160, 170 megahertz range, which some of the channels, commercial channels, operate on, right? Like some of the LAD channels and stuff like that, you'll probably want a red band, right? So they're not a wide band antenna. So one of the benefits to that is that they have, I believe, a little bit more function of gain, right? And that's the next thing I'm going to talk about between these radios. So this one here, I still am utilizing the factory antenna, which in my experience actually hasn't been too bad of an antenna. This Baofeng crap, which, you know, it's not a bad radio, I guess, it's just not a very good one at the same time. It came with a crappy antenna, which basically amounted to what is a glorified dummy load. So it's just a radiator. Like, it doesn't actually have any function of gain, where this particular antenna is an upgrade. So this one here is an RH771. So it's a Diamond brand antenna, 771. It offers, I don't quite remember what the function of gain is. It might have been 2 dBi or something like that. Gain over nothing. So there's that. Obviously these are dual band radios. They're not straight VHF radios. So these radios will receive and transmit in the UHF band range, whereas commercial radios, your commercial portables, there may be some dual band ones out there, but I don't actually know of any off the top of my head. So when you get a commercial portable radio, they typically are either UHF or VHF. But like I said, there may be some dual band commercials out there. I just don't know of them off the top of my head. I'm not familiar with them. So what that means for you guys out there that have these dual band Chinese radios is that you can actually program in your FMRS and GMRS radios. So those little Motorola talkabouts and stuff like that. They've got they've got their specific frequencies that have been allocated to them for use, right? So your radios will have that on here, and I've got them. I don't know if I can actually get it to show up on here, but I can go through and I can go right back. So there's some of my channels that I've got programmed in here. So there I have my FRS channels. 14 of them, and then there's 7 GMRS. And the other nice thing about these things being a dual band radio, they have dual receive, right? So you can receive simultaneously between the two bands. And also if you have 2 VHF frequencies programmed in, it'll pick up the stronger of the two if they're both transmitting at the same time, and one will dominate the other. But you can pick up 2 VHF frequencies at the same time if you decide that you want to monitor stuff. And between these two, the other big thing is the little bit pricier, higher end Chinese radio has a selector knob for scrolling through your channels. And that is a very, very nice feature over these ones, which you have to press the buttons. It drives me nuts. So I'm not going to get into too much detail as far as the actual functioning of these radios and stuff. That's just go down a rabbit hole with them. But that's some of the differences between those radios and the commercial radio on the left there versus those 2 Chinese radios. Now we're going to look at some of these mobile radios. These 2 radios are both VHF Mobile Radios. They're not dual band like those 2, which means they only receive and only transmit in the VHF band range. Now, this radio, being an amateur radio, was locked from the factory, meaning that it would listen and receive anything from 136 to 174, but would only transmit in the ham band, so 144 to 148. And this particular radio I've opened up, so it will transmit outside of the ham band because I'm able to do that legally where I live with my license. And these radios have about 60 watts of output. A lot of people get carried away with the output of the radio, and really that is not very important. What's important with all of these radios, including your mobiles, is your antenna and how much gain it has. Now this radio, this is a big radio. This is not a radio you're going to see every day. This is a Kenwood Tk 5710h, and it's a 110 watt VHF commercial radio. And so this radio, of course, is not face programmable. There is a field programmable mode, but it is not simple to use. It's a royal pain in the butt, so you've got to program it in with software and stuff like that. So as far as versatility and being able to, operate on the fly and enter new frequencies, for instance, if you're driving around and, you go from one area to another area and the frequencies change, or your, squelch codes and stuff change and whatnot, you can't just change that readily like you can an amateur band radio, which is all programmable from the face on the fly, as well as having your saved preset memories. The remotes are a little bit more, the handset is a little more complicated to use, obviously, having those extra features. So you can program in and change a lot of the features of the radio with your mic, whereas this one is just straight DTMF. So the other thing, I'll go back to these portables. One thing to also consider is the battery capacity. That's something that, if you're looking at some of these, you might want to take into consideration. So this Baofeng, even though it's got some weaknesses, right, as far as its receiver and whatnot, it's got some real advantages over the other radios. The one big one being is that it's got a massive battery. It's got a 3,400 milliamp hour battery. I've dropped it, so I actually notice I split the case, but 36. So, of course, being Chinese, it says nickel metal hydrate in one place, and then it says lithium ion in the other. I know for a fact that these are lithium ion because I pulled them apart. So the small batteries are nowhere near as big. Oh, it's all stuck. I don't know what's going on here. Probably got some gunk on it. It's been a while since I've taken that battery off. There we go. Trying to do it one hand, it doesn't want to cooperate. So that's a big difference. So this is the other one, 1700 milliamp hour, and does not have anywhere near as much talk time as the Baofeng. So a lot of the Baofengs you see look like this, and they come with a small battery pack, not the big battery pack. So you see they're 5 watts. 5 watts. So the other thing is that they don't transmit at 5 watts in the UHF band range. They transmit at 4 watts, and both of them are the same. I've tested power output on these things with a really high-end Bird watt meter, and they're pretty much where they're supposed to be. You know, but some of the new radios and stuff that you're seeing coming out of China are offering like 8 watts of output, and people go, oh yeah, I gotta get the 8 watt radio, you gotta get the 8 watt radio. Honestly, it won't make any difference as far as how far you can transmit. Really, you're not going to notice it. You're going to get way more out of actually having a good quality aftermarket antenna, and you can also run like a little magnetic mount antenna that's probably got, you know, 2.5 to 3 dBi gain in your vehicle with one of these things, and that's going to give you way more improvements as far as transmission and receive ability than you would ever get by upgrading, or not upgrading, I don't even want to say upgrading, but spending a little more money and buying one of these Baofengs that have 8 watts like the UV8R or whatnot. So with that being said, you can also run a car kit, which is plugged in to your cigarette lighter, and you can get that for any of these radios, which is nice, because with these antennas, I mean, they're matched. You don't have to worry about, you know, going through a big installation process with a, you know, like a permanently installed portable radio in your vehicle, because that's not something that should be just done by anybody. Because with VHF radio, you, for instance, if you're running like a Larson wideband antenna, or even a narrowband, which I run a narrowband antenna for this because of the power output on this. The widebands are limited to 100 watts or whatever the heck they are. I'm not quite capable of handling full output of these, so I run a narrowband. But what I'm getting at is that those antennas have to be matched, you know, to the frequency that you want to transmit on, right? So if you start transmitting, say, at 138 megahertz, and you've got an antenna that's matched to 174 megahertz, your match may come back on your SWR meter as being like 3-to-1 or something like that. So what that means is that that power is being reflected back into the radio. So you'll burn your radio out if you talk too long on an antenna that's not matched properly. And it also means that that radio signal is not being efficiently propagated out from the antenna. It's just not resonating, right? So it actually has a frequency that's reflecting back at the radio, and it will burn out the finals on the radio. So that is another important thing to consider when you're looking at, you know, like an actual portable, like a mobile radio that you permanently install in your vehicle. You can't just throw one in, hook up the power, and go down to, you know, your local radio shop and say, hey, I want a, you know, a VHF antenna, and, you know, slap it in. It's not that simple. Whereas your portables are a little more foolproof in a sense. I mean, they're still not perfect, because, like, for instance, these ICOMs, you know, they've got a bit of a narrower band antenna. So if you were to talk outside of that band range, you probably would end up having your radio, you know, you'd end up damaging it. So, but going into just sidetracking down rabbit holes, you can set up things like talk out timers and whatnot on your radio so that it forces the radio, like it actually stops transmitting after, say, 30 seconds of talking, right? So that you can kind of get around that. But the point I'm making is that if you're interested in getting radios, you need to do some research, and you need to take some time to learn about these things. You know, I've never done a video on radios before, so I'm just kind of thinking about, you know, the relevant things to talk about with them. And I'm probably going to do some more videos on them, and I'll try to do better as I go along, and, you know, focus in on maybe more pertinent things about them. But most importantly is educate yourself on them, right? You know, the guys that are into the knives and the guns and stuff like that, they spend a whole lot of time learning about ballistics and, you know, all the ins and outs of their tools. And it's no different with radios. There is a lot, I mean, a lot of stuff that you can learn about when it comes to radios and RF propagation, and just the basic fundamentals when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? And it's not overly complicated, you know, the simple stuff, right? The basics, the fundamentals, the stuff that is important, that anybody using a radio should really have a, you know, basic understanding of. But yeah, I just figured I'd talk about radios for a change. I talk about knives and stuff all the time, and radios are important. You know, especially given the current climate in the world and whatnot. I mean, if we were to ever have a grid down situation and your cell phone doesn't work, what are you going to do, right? I mean, all our repeater stations that we have set up here, and I've got a repeater station myself, they're completely off grid, right? You know, solar power, battery backup power on mine, generator power. It's all tied into grid power as well, with like Magnum Energy inverter chargers and stuff. So everything just gets switched over, and I've got stuff set up so that it'll fire up and all that fun stuff. But yeah, so radios. There's gonna be a time and place, I'm sure, coming up here with the way things are going, that you're gonna want a radio, and you're gonna want to know how to use it, and you're gonna want to understand, you know, the basic fundamentals of the radios, and how they function, and whatnot, and what you can do with them, and what you can't do with them, and so on and so forth. Because if you ever get stuck where you actually need one, and you've got one, for instance, and you've not spent the time to learn about it, you're going to regret it, because they're not complicated. I mean, they are complicated, but they're not complicated to the point that you know, anybody couldn't understand enough about them to actually feel confident in what they're doing with them, and how they work. So if you can field strip your, you know, AR or whatever you've got, right, you know, you're certainly going to be able to learn how to operate and understand the fundamentals behind how radios work, and the differences between VHF and UHF and FM and AM, and, you know, just the basics. So I hope that you guys find that interesting, and yeah, hopefully I can look at doing some more videos. Maybe I can show you some of the programming procedures and whatnot between, you know, the commercial radios and these Chinese radios and stuff, because I know a lot of you guys out there that have bought these radios, specifically the Chinese ones, have struggled, you know, with programming them, whether it be programming them via the faceplate, or even trying to do it with software. There's definitely some challenges that go along with these. For instance, these ones here, they're a bit of a pain. Software that was written to program them came out back in the days of Windows 95, for instance, right? So I've got, you know, an old netbook running Windows XP that is dedicated to running my programming software for these older guys. The programming cables themselves are, you know, serial cable, so I've got to use a serial to USB adapter and go through all the setup with the drivers and everything. So it's a bit of a pain, whereas these ones are a little bit better. They've got software that is compatible with, you know, newer operating systems and whatnot. But yeah, so it's you know, it's somewhat involved for sure, but it's fun, you know, something to keep you out of trouble, you know, and learning new stuff, I guess. But yeah. Anyways, if you guys have anything you can think of with respects to radios and whatnot that you'd like to see me cover or talk about, or maybe you know, instructional or whatever, definitely let me know in the comments. Like I said, this is my first sort of shot at making a video on radios, so it's going to take a little bit for me to get comfortable with doing them and learning how to talk about them in a way that comes across well in the videos.